This is a direct response to the video made by ThatAnimeSnob about objectivity. I just wanted to add my own ideas about what I think about objectivity and what I think people could adapt at their own standards when it comes to making an objective assessment of an anime or anything what that means. So there are many different definitions of the word objective. Merriam-Webster defines objectivity as based on facts rather than feelings or opinions, not influenced by feelings, or in philosophical terms, existing outside of the mind, existing in the real world, or even in a grammatical sense, relating to nouns, noun phrases, or pronouns that are objects of the verbs and predispositions. So we can ignore the last one, but when you apply objectivity to an anime, you could talk about facts which are true for the anime, or you could talk about values which you can rationally explain to fit the anime. The easiest way to be objective about an anime is to simply state facts, like the person who directed the anime, or the key animators, the studio which made it, or the names of the characters in the show. However, these are all irrelevant when evaluating or rating an anime. Before I go into this, we'll talk about the idea of being biased about anime. Let's go first back and see what the word means. Bias means a tendency to believe that someone or some people or ideas and so on better than others, and usually results in treating some people unfairly, or a strong interest in something or ability to do something. Translating the first definition sounds like this: a tendency to believe that some elements in an anime are better than others, that usually results in treating some anime unfairly. Our tendency as humans to have preferences is universal and needed in order to do anything. If I wouldn't have the bias to make the video about the subject, instead I would have the bias to sit in front of my computer and play video games, I wouldn't make this video. So there's a cognitive bias for me to rather spend my time making this video than spending it on something different. Bias directly creates actions and decisions. It is impossible to turn off bias. However, it is possible to minimize the quantity of bias one has to the minimum that is needed in order to talk about something. So what do I mean with that? You can remove bias from elements which are not necessary to talk about something. For example, when you're having a job interview and you're interviewing a person and that person has specific hair color, specific eye color, specific gender or political beliefs or something, that you can remove the bias that you usually have for all of these things, the preferences, and only assess those which you find necessary in order to fulfill a specific task. So it's like a pragmatical approach to bias, so that sometimes some elements are just irrelevant in order to fulfill the desired result. Now, it's impossible to evaluate anything without bias because evaluation is based on decisions, and decisions are contingent on the preferences or bias. Like the easiest examples, if you can choose between vanilla and chocolate ice cream, which you're gonna choose? You're obviously going to choose the one that you have a cognitive bias for. This doesn't mean you have to like the other one more as a taste. Sometimes the decision goes directly in the opposite, but still there was a tendency, there was a decision made which was created out of a preference or a bias or an impulse that created an evaluation of something that, that you took A instead of B. And the same goes here for this idea. Usually we tend to stick to the biases we prefer instead of the biases we dislike. So I would take chocolate instead of vanilla ice cream because I like chocolate more. But I could prefer that moment to be rebellious and take vanilla instead of chocolate because I always take chocolate and chocolate's my favorite, but I just think, I'm gonna take vanilla because whatever. When we talk about being unbiased and objective, all we really say is that we should only base our evaluations on what we know is true and not what we wish is true. We can't really be biased in the sense that your bias is bad, but simply unjustified. And with unjustified, I mean whatever opinion we hold is not based on the most accurate representation of reality. If I say Sword on a Line is bad because Kirito eats babies, and that is my criteria for why I think it is bad, I might be stating a fact that Kirito eats babies that has to be critically questioned if true. Then it's not true that Kirito eats babies. My bias towards the show is based on the wrong data and invalid and unjustified. However, even if it was true, then there is still the next issue. Criteria. Criteria are the only basis we can have when talking about objectivity. What is a meter? A meter is a unit used to describe distance between 2 points. However, a meter is nothing essential about the universe. So what does it mean when I say that a person is 2 meters high? It simply means, based on the idea of what a meter is, a person resembles the same spatial size as that of 2 meters. Meters are criteria, but some people use inch instead, or feet. There's no right or wrong way to assess distance, but still you can be objective about it, regardless what criteria you use. In order to make objective statements about anime, which are also value statements, you need to have a criteria beforehand. Let's say your criteria for good anime is that it has to have at least one character in it with blue hair color. If this criteria is not met, the anime is objectively failing based on your criteria, and you can say it was a bad anime. However, not everyone values blue hair in anime, and some might even value it negatively. This hair color is not realistic, thus it is bad. Could be an argument used against an anime. Which brings me to my final point about objectivity, how one could be objective. Premise 1. Define the lowest low you can think of for different criteria or categories. Let's start with something easy. Animation. Animation has a set definition. Animation is the process of creating motion and shape changes solutions by means of rapid display of sequences of static images that minimal differ from each other. Now let's think of the worst possible animation. The worst possible animation surely is anything that fails to be animation. So if only static images are used, you can't really talk about animation at all. Now every state which has at least one more frame per specific time unit is objectively better than without. One frame per action, for example a cake which is used as a static image like a comic book, is a 0. Then adding one more picture to it would make it objectively better in being animation than it was before. Now adding more frames to this would improve the animation quality. The harder part is to find a ceiling. What would be the best animation possible? This is dependent on the subject experience of the animation. But as a genuine rule, humans can't really detect more than 300 frames per second, so that would be the ceiling. But you can go lower. The minimum would be somewhere between 30 to 100 frames per second to have fluid motion, because that's the point where the eye recognizes fluid motion. Anything beyond that is only for trained eyes and extra, but they don't really add anything. But anything below that is making motion less fluid. When assessing something like animation, you can't just talk about the moment when animation is happening, but the entire experience. However, you can compare to how well the anime does compared to the lowest low, 0 frames per second, and to other anime. Which brings in statistics. Statistics is useful when evaluating, since you have a broader understanding of a subject and more reference points. But without going into much detail here, I go back on point. So, premise 1, define the lowest low. Premise 2, compare to a statistical sense based on the performance of a criterion. Premise 3, think of a possible highest high which could be achieved. Premise 3 is the hardest, because you can only talk about either personal preference or experience statistical data to what constitutes a highest high. But you could at least infer if what you evaluate resembles anything like that. Of course, just as the lowest low, you have to define the highest high. If you follow these 3 steps, you can make real objective evaluations. However, keep in mind that in the end of the day, these are all contingent on values, and those values must be shared by those who want to evaluate the same thing. If a person does not value animation, no matter how correct you are about the quality of the animation, that person will not take into account when assessing your evaluation, just as a person might not find blue hair as important. Now there's one last silver bullet you can use, which is the idea of essence. Anime has a definition, and is based on specific elements. These elements are the anime's essence. For example, anime must have animation in them, or else they don't count as anime. Thus you can appeal to animation as a core essence of an anime, since it is part of the definition of anime. In order to not fall into the true Scotsman fallacy, you must make sure that you only talk about elements which truly are the essence of the definition of what you're talking about. Since in Japan the term anime refers to all forms of animation from around the world, having a story, characters, a soundtrack, or any additional element besides animation is not required to count as anime. Thus, you're not required to evaluate any of that if you evaluate an anime. You can entirely evaluate anime based on its animation, and anything else is extra, which you can find also outside of anime, like stories and characters and so on, or music. If you think the story is the most important part of an anime, you're not much more right than the person who thinks that blue hair is the most important thing. You can clearly make a good logical case for why you should value story more than blue hair, but in the end, the story is not required for an anime to be an anime. Which brings me to my absolute final conclusion. When rating, reviewing, or evaluating anime, state what elements, categories, criteria you have to evaluate on. State what you define as the lowest low, the highest high, and how it compares to the statistical set of similar examples. Then you are objective in the best and most honest way you can.